Interstellar. When watching it for the first time, I had the impression that this movie was filmed not in 2013, but back in the 80s, because the pace of the narration is not typical for modern movies. It is a very slow movie with wide shots, showing us the beauty of earthly and alien landscapes. Accompanied by a magnificent soundtrack, we can feel and enjoy every object and every corner of the landscape, reverently designed using special effects. But despite all the scientific accuracy and all the bright and distinctive elements of science fiction, there's something that not only contradicts the essence of the genre, but also kills all the magic that Nolan carefully creates throughout the movie. I'm talking about love as a calculable quantity.
One thing we're capable of perceiving that transcends dimensions of time and space,
Which is equated with the laws of physics in the movie. First, Nolan explains to us in detail how black holes, sinkholes, time, gravity, singularity, and the event horizon work. He spends 2 hours explaining to us how the universe works, what is possible, and what is impossible from a physics point of view. He accurately constructs the story, cause and effect relationships, and leads us to some great discovery, and finally says, "Anyway, love saved everyone."
The love towards love.
You would probably say, "Chris, what the hell? It's so ridiculous, so stupid and illogical." However, it seems so only at first glance, because if you understand what task Christopher Nolan set for himself, if you understand what he wanted to say and show, love becomes the most appropriate and logical thing that could appear in the movie's finale. First, it's worth noting that even reliable astrophysicists and science popularizers admit that Interstellar has a strong scientific basis. Of course, as with any work of fiction, some elements of the movie have been exaggerated for the sake of entertainment, or simplified to make things easier for the audience to understand. Kip Thorne, who came up with the idea for the movie, set conditions for the studio. Every element of the movie must conform to modern scientific theories and look as realistic as possible. For example, for the animation of Black Hole, a special software based on the calculations of physicist Kip Thorne, containing 40,000 lines of C++ codes, was created. Each frame of the image took 100 hours of rendering, using a server with 30,000 CPU cores. Every detail of the movie is worked out and proved theoretically. You can understand the full scope of the work by reading Kip Thorne's book, The Science of Interstellar. And based on the book, now we will tackle the main question. Who saved people? How and why? Cooper suggests that the portal to another galaxy and the hypercube inside the black hole were created by people of the future.
People couldn't build this.
No, not yet. One day.
He says that one day, thousands of years from now, humanity will cross the barrier of 4 dimensions and, in an impulse of altruism, will give a helping hand to their ancestors. But that doesn't make sense. The people of the future cannot be the creators of the cube for 2 reasons. First, the last plants on Earth are about to die. Food and oxygen run out, and without that, humans are guaranteed to die and not be able to become those very creatures in the future. And if they manage to survive the plant disease in underground bunkers, synthesizing oxygen and eating something alternative, and then evolved into super beings, there is simply no reason for them to save a backward civilization, which will not be lost without help. If we assume that this is altruism, it would be the same as if we discovered a time machine and set out to stop all the wars of the past. We would prevent some people from dying, but at the same time we would prevent others from being born, because we would rewrite history. What has happened is what has already happened. We can't change it, only rewrite it. If it is altruism, it takes an extremely perverse form similar to that described in Isaac Asimov's The End of Eternity. If people die, there is no one to save them, and if they survive, there is no reason to save them. We can assume that there's a time loop here, like in The Terminator, where it turns out that John Connor's father comes from the future. But it's a paradox. It's fine for an action movie, but not for serious science fiction aspiring to be realistic. Kip Thorne would not have allowed such a paradox in the script. as it goes against modern concepts. Based on the book, we can conclude that these were not humans. There is a popular theory that humans were saved by robots. It says that the humans on Earth died, but the robots, who don't need food or oxygen, survived, and in the distant future, evolved to the point where they were able to cross the barrier of 4 dimensions. And they interacted with the past from the 5th dimension to resurrect humanity. However, Dr. Mann disproves this theory in a conversation with Cooper.
Don't you, Cooper? The machine doesn't improvise well because you can't program a fear of death. Our survival instinct is our single greatest source of inspiration.
Robots, despite their logical behavior and quite intelligent speech, are very narrow-minded. They are incapable of improvisation and therefore stupid. On the Miller planet, Tars wasn't going to save Amelia until Doyle ordered him to. Robots don't have a fear of death, and that prevents them from adapting to their environment. It's hard to imagine humans spending their last resources not to survive, but to send a damn piece from Tetris into space in the hopes that it would invent a time machine. The creatures that created the portal and the hypercube have nothing in common with humans. Cooper was wrong because he's a pilot and an engineer, but not a physicist. Throughout the movie, they explain everything that is happening to him. His knowledge is incomplete. If Romilly, Brand, or Doyle were in Tesseract, they wouldn't even think that these beings could be humans or even resemble anyone existing in our future. In the book, The Science of Interstellar, these beings are called the bulk being. Bulk is another dimension, something that is below our 3 or 4 dimensions when time is considered. Human beings are trapped in time due to their limitations. Each of us can only be in the present. The future and the past are closed to human beings. But for the bulk beings, there is no future and no past. For them, time is the same dimension as length or height for us. Bulk beings are not made up of atoms and molecules, because these particles can only exist in a 3-dimensional world, not a 5-dimensional one. Cooper didn't even realize he was still in 3 dimensions. He saw his daughters, thousands of rooms, and thought he had been transported to the 4th dimension, but that wasn't the case. The Tesseract is a model of the 4 dimensions, what they should look like in 3-dimensional reality. Kip Thorne gives a more detailed explanation of the structure of this cosmic cabinet. You can understand the essence of bulk beings from the movie A Space Odyssey, which was Christopher Nolan's inspiration. The Doctor has been fascinated by the Odyssey since childhood and doesn't hide the similarities between the films. On the contrary, he emphasizes them. In Interstellar, the wormhole appears at Saturn, while in Odyssey, it appears at Jupiter. In one story, the protagonist flies into a black hole, and in the other, he flies straight into the sun. In both movies, the protagonists are guided and protected from destructive forces by someone's will. Cooper ends up in a space closet, and Bowman in a hotel room. There are no antagonists in either Interstellar or Space Odyssey. Dr. Mann had no malicious intent. He just chickened out, and in Odyssey, Hal is just a crazy computer. From the director's explanation and from the book by Arthur Clarke, author of the Odyssey, we learn that Bowman dies and then is reborn in a disembodied form as pure intelligent energy. He becomes one of these 5-dimensional creatures. These are the kind of creatures Christopher Nolan means by the word they. Alien beings without bodies, pure energy with intelligence. We don't know what bulk beings look like. We only see the result of their work. A wormhole near Saturn and a tesseract inside a black hole. Arthur C. Clarke said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So everything that happens in both movies seems like magic from the perspective of a simple pilot.
I hesitate to term it supernatural, but it definitely wasn't scientific initially.
From this perspective, 5-dimensional beings seem to be some kind of omnipotent godlike time travelers. But their influence on our 3-dimensional world is quite limited. They have infinite access to time, from the birth to the death of the universe. But because of their immense scale, they simply cannot trace any particular time period. For them, finding a specific day, let alone a specific minute, is like finding a specific grain of sand in the Sahara Desert for us. That's why they didn't transmit quantum data to humans directly. Time is perceptible to them, but very vague. They can go to any moment in the past and the future, but the problem is finding that specific moment. So, they needed someone from our three-dimensional world. They needed to encourage people to get the data from the black hole themselves. How did the bulk beings do it? The answer is contained in the very first scene of the movie. In the scene where a sudden anomaly created by the five-dimensional beings causes Cooper to crash on the Ranger. For bulk beings, the past, present, and future happen simultaneously, and if they make any change to reality, they instantly see the result of that change in the future. And by giving people a lifeline, they can see immediately if people in the future will be able to survive. The five-dimensional creatures begin to make changes in reality until one of them works and leads to the desired result: the survival of people. The first impact is the creation of a portal to the Gargantua black hole, where quantum data can be obtained. This portal had been hanging off Saturn for about 50 years. All that was needed was a man to walk through it and get to the black hole. The leading physicist, Dr. Brand, thought it would be impossible to get into the black hole and get the data, or rather impossible to transmit it because of the enormous gravity. But he didn't know that the bulk beings have placed a tesseract inside the black hole, which will allow them to survive and set up communication. So Brand begins to prepare the Lazarus Plan, according to which people on Earth die. A small expedition of 3 or 4 people flies through the portal and begins to revive the human race in the old-fashioned way on one of the planets in a new galaxy. Humanity was to be reborn on the new planet as Lazarus, the man who died and resurrected. But the bulk beings were not interested in this plan. They wanted to save all people, not just some of them. So they organized everything in such a way that a person would end up in the black hole one way or another. I will emphasize this point because it is especially important. None of the humans knew that there would be a hypercube inside Gargantua that would allow the human to survive the black hole and successfully transmit data. Jumping into the black hole meant death. How do we force humans to make the jump when it goes against our instinct for survival and self-preservation?
Take you, for example. A father with a survival instinct that extends to your kids.
We have to overpower that instinct. That is, the bulk beings used human love, which made it possible to extrapolate the survival instinct to another person. In this way, you can make a person put aside fear and jump into a black hole. Not because love is calculable, but because humans are emotional, and the five-dimensional creatures took advantage of this to encourage humans to do what was necessary for the survival of the species. It's extremely difficult to force a man to sacrifice for strangers, but for the sake of his beloved daughter, Cooper was willing to do anything. Bulk beings used Cooper's love for Murph to get him to leave Earth, and that same love to get him to risk himself for his daughter's survival. Throughout the movie, we learn that Cooper was part of Mann's team, and 10 years ago, along with Dr. Mann, he also traveled from Earth into a portal and then to a planet in another galaxy. But some gravitational anomaly prevented him from taking off, and he crashed. No one but him had ever encountered anything like this before. He was the only one of the entire crew whose Ranger was affected. Having created this anomaly, the bulk beings immediately saw the result of the impact. Humanity survived in the future. The Ranger crashed, so Cooper had to spend 10 years farming and had a daughter. 10 years later, Cooper is going into space again, but this time for the sake of his daughter. Not to save humanity, but to keep his daughter safe. The five-dimensional creatures knew that Dr. Mann would betray the humans and destroy the ship, Endurance. They knew that there would be no fuel left on the wrecked ship for the return trip, that Cooper would be forced into a black hole, and humanity would survive because of Cooper and his self-sacrifice, driven by love. Not because love is a calculable quantity. On the contrary, it is not calculable. It cannot be measured, and it doesn't pervade the entire universe. It is an abstract feeling that only matters to only 2 individuals. Love saved everyone, not because Nolan is a mediocre director who makes movies for a mediocre audience, which I often read in the comments, but because the protagonist is just a man. He's a father who wants his daughter to be safe.
One thing becomes really clear. And that's that you want to make sure your children feel safe.
Humans are narrow-minded and understand the world on an emotional level. Yes, that's who we are. Cooper took it that way because it was the only thing that mattered to him.
The love, Tars, love. It's just like Brand said.
That's how he understood it. And that brings us to the question, why would the bulk beings want to save people?
You're doing it for me. For all of us.
Cooper was right about that. Partly. Try to imagine beings who have the answers to all the riddles of the universe, who have seen the beginning and end of time, how the universe was born, and how it will die, if it ever does. They have seen all the metamorphoses of the universe. There are no mysteries to them, but there is something illogical and contradictory in the universe. People, their emotions, feelings, hopes, and faith in the future. These incalculable and chaotic qualities work according to laws far from the laws of physics, and therefore they are interesting to the bulk beings. A human being is beautiful, perhaps silly or contradictory, but truly beautiful and mysterious. You can dig into these depths endlessly. Each of the characters made mistakes, and that was their preciousness. Dr. Brand wanted to save everyone, but found no answer and decided to trick everyone. Dr. Mann went to save mankind, but he was scared to death and was willing to leave the members of the expedition to die. Eventually, he unintentionally pushed Cooper to jump into a black hole, thereby contributing to saving people.
You fucking coward.
Yes.
If it hadn't been for man, Endurance Station wouldn't have blown up. There would have been enough supplies to get back to Earth, and Cooper wouldn't have had to sacrifice himself for the sake of the mission. He would have flown to his daughter on a hopelessly dying planet. Murph hadn't spoken to her father in 30 years, yet she still wore his jacket because she loved him. And Cooper, who didn't care about anyone on the planet except his daughter, went to Gargantua for the sake of Murph, while she continued working on the project for him. And they became the bridge.
We're the bridge.
We're getting to the part where Cooper claims that love is quantifiable.
Brand said. My connection with Murph, it is quantifiable.
This scene caused a storm of criticism. Interstellar had stuck to realism before it, but suddenly cheated itself with a concept that says, love can save everyone. This is similar to Snow White or Beauty and the Beast. However, this scene remained misunderstood. Amelia suggests this idea when she and Cooper argue about which planet to fly to. She has a doctorate in physics and knows better than anyone that love is just a quirk of perception, not a measurable thing. At this moment, it was not the voice of a scientist speaking inside her. It was the voice of a person who wants to see her loved one. It was just an attempt to dissuade Cooper from flying to man. She is confused and scared. This is her only chance to see Edmonds.
That doesn't mean I'm wrong.
Honestly, Amelia, it might.
Cooper talks about Amelia's bias and then comes to the same conclusions when it comes to him. Compared to the universe, humans are just a tiny grain of sand. Space is vast. Its scale is impressive and mind-boggling. It is incredibly vast, perhaps even terrifying. It is bigger than anything you can imagine, and yet is simple and boring. Everything in it repeats itself over and over again. The same processes, the same metamorphoses, vast, lifeless environments, and massive objects. But a human being, even the most mediocre, is complex and unique compared to space and any of its objects, even though it's small in size. Therefore, we can say that human beings are bigger than the space. With all their dramas and contradictions, humans are the most interesting part of space, a small diamond in the infinite void. Love is an interstellar connection, abstract, intangible, and amazing. That's why the bulk beings saved people. They saw Brand's lies, man's betrayal, and Amelia's carelessness. But they also saw what Cooper did, They saw his sacrifice and the mutual aid. The bulk beings see people not just in the present moment, in the moment of doing something stupid. They see our whole history and our potential, what we can become. Perhaps one day we will join them to help a young and beautiful race simply because its intangible interstellar connection is bigger than the entire space. I am not saying that this space is easy for us. We are three-dimensional beings, and it is not possible for us to fully understand it. But for five-dimensional beings, it has no mysteries. Everything is calculable and perfectly comprehensible. It's the most appropriate ending possible. Love as the only thing that matters to the father and daughter. Love as something abstract and exciting in the universe. And love as the engine of the science fiction genre. Here we come to the most important thing. It's worth noting that it wasn't Nolan who came up with the idea for the movie. Kip Thorne came up with the idea at the end of the 20th century, and by 2005 he had already written the screenplay. He is not just a brilliant physicist, he is a Nobel Prize winner, one of the world's leading experts in astrophysics, gravity, measurement theory, and the general theory of relativity. Kip Thorne is a very significant person in science. Interstellar was meant to be a movie that would introduce science to a mass audience and even inspire them to study it. But it was a dry scientific idea, so Kip Thorne was looking for a talented screenwriter who would add emotion to the story so that the movie wouldn't feel like a documentary. In an interview, Christopher Nolan pointed out that the main thing in a feature film is an emotional adventure, not a spatial one. Therefore, the Nolan brothers added the personal drama of the relationship between father and daughter to the story. The science fiction genre itself has almost lost its relevance. It wasn't enough to show technology, space, and some concepts from the stories of science fiction classics. What was needed was a kickstart, an element that would make the genre relevant and exciting, like in the good old days. An element that would make people go to space again and experience the journey. Christopher Nolan says he wanted to make a movie that we have to feel, not just understand. Emotion had to come first, so he added a subtle dramaturgical underpinning. Watching Cooper and his daughter, we didn't even notice we were riding a good old-fashioned sci-fi ride. We watched the Odyssey again, and it became even more colorful. Nolan had literally refreshed the classics and created an Odyssey that will delight both a physicist and the average person, because the director tackles topics that everyone understands. Watching Cooper and his daughter, we didn't notice we were being pumped full of physics for 2 hours. In terms of science, there are some compromises and simplifications here, but Kip Thorne has gotten it right. He has made the most accurate and believable science fiction movie ever made. This is the most real science fiction. Only Discovery TV shows are more scientific. His book, Sold Out at the Speed of Light, contains 330 pages, where every episode of the movie is described and proved with the utmost precision. Every revolution of Gargantua around its axis is calculated. The structure of the hypercube and the wormhole is described, and it all looks the way it would look in reality. There isn't a single scientific, unsound action or lapse here. And if you think at one point that what's happening on screen is delusional and impossible in reality, in his book, Kip Thorne says it's absolutely possible, and here's why. The book could be considered the director's version of Interstellar. It explains how Cooper ended up in a time loop where he endlessly brings himself to it. The point is, he wasn't the one who initially brought himself there. Thorne didn't accept the idea that the bulk beings are the people of the future. They are just some sort of extraterrestrial creatures. As the physicist says, the idea of making them human beings entirely belongs to Nolan. But it's not Nolan who says it. It's his character, Cooper. And we don't have to take all of this literally. It's part of the dramatic aspect and in no way contradicts scientific knowledge. It should be noted that a lot of details were removed because the movie was getting too long. Nolan left minor references to the original script. People needed quantum data and black holes to understand how gravity works.
The collapsed star inside. The singularity. Yeah, we'd solve gravity.
Upon receiving the data, scientists reduced the Earth's mass by almost 100%. The Earth slowly collapses, and all humans fly off the Earth in centrifuge-like ships. It would take too long to explain. Nevertheless, Nolan focuses on the fact that Brand's Science Center is inside a huge centrifuge.
Centrifuge. Some kind of vehicle. Space station?
Both. Plan A.
People are being rescued from the Earth at the centrifuge stations, which is what we see at the end of the movie. Kip Thorne consulted Zemeckis while making the movie Contact, which is based on the Carl Sagan novel. Originally, Jodie Foster's character was supposed to fly into a black hole instead of a wormhole, but Thorne objected to the idea as it was considered impossible at the time. But 20 years later, based on new data, it turned out to be real, and the episode migrated to Interstellar. Stanley Kubrick wrote The Odyssey together with Arthur Clarke. Clarke is a writer, sci-fi writer, and scientist who suggested the idea of geostationary satellites. The idea was later implemented and enabled the creation of almost all global communication systems and the internet. Moreover, Arthur Clarke gave up the patent so that the technology would belong to humanity. That's what science fiction should be. It should inspire discovery. People need to dream, to look out into space.
Explorers, pioneers, not caretakers.
It is fiction that leaves room for thinking about space, its possible inhabitants, dimensions, and gravity, that ask us the right questions instead of giving us dubious answers. While not everything was included in the movie, the enormous sold-out run of the science of Interstellar indicates people's need for such knowledge and such works of art. It's hard to describe how important movies like this are to the genre, and to filmmaking in general. This is what high standards look like. It's a scientific stuffing in a dramatic wrapper. We were gently immersed in a complex matter. And if you want to delve deeper into the world of astrophysics, you can read Kip Thorne's book. Nolan also brings up another topic in the movie. Despite Cooper's assumptions, it's clear that the bulk beings have nothing in common with humans. The director doesn't show them to us, doesn't show who they are or where they are. That's not the question Interstellar answers. There is only one question that is relevant here. Why? Why save humans? And why does the universe need humans? To emphasize this subtle human nature, Nolan approached the selection of the soundtrack in a very unusual way. It was important to him that the music be outside of any genre. So he asked Hans Zimmer to compose just one page of music without even telling him what the movie was about. The director granted the composer total freedom and conditions of pure creativity. And then Nolan tricked him. He said this music should be about a father and his relationship with his son. So Zimmer composed music about what it's like to be a father, what it's like to have a son, what it feels like. He composed music about himself. When Nolan heard the melody that later became the basis of the soundtrack, he realized that the music was perfect and accurately described the emotion he wished to see. When the musical idea was formed, Nolan told Zimmer that this was a big science fiction movie and that it wouldn't be about a son, it'll be about a daughter. Nolan knew that Hans Zimmer had a son and took advantage of that. This helped the composer to get to the heart of the movie. Christopher listened to the soundtrack again and again while he was finishing the script and then shooting the movie. Every scene is saturated with this music. The director and the composer unanimously agreed that a huge church organ should be the main musical instrument. It's an instrument that evokes some sublime feelings, that have a spiritual or even a religious element, even though the movie is not religious at all. Nolan says that the organ and the acoustics of the cathedral reflect our humanness and the attempt to reflect something mystical and metaphysical, something beyond us and our understanding. The organ has a structural, very complex and organic sound. Nolan and Zimmer didn't want to use the typical sci-fi movie instruments, symphony orchestras and synthesizers, lest they end up with a cliché soundtrack.
There's something very human about it because it can only make a sound with air and it needs to breathe. And on each note you hear the breath. We hear the exhale.
You feel a human presence in every sound.
There it is. Nolan said that's what will keep the movie in the atmosphere of something more than just cosmic loneliness. After all, we're not looking at space, we're looking at the people in it. I'm not a physicist, and I might have made some mistakes, calling the fourth dimension the fifth or vice versa. But I'm convinced that this is the most successful attempt to combine science and art. I don't know where that line was crossed, but at some point, I realized that I don't feel anything when watching modern science fiction. This ridiculous fiction, with very few exceptions. Perhaps we've lost something with the advent of CGI technology. I think back to that dark atmosphere and understatedness of the last century's movies. Every location contained a mystery in it. There were those human-sized models and shitty 2D special effects when the focus was on storytelling and emotion because there was nothing else available. Nolan understands what is the backbone or core of a genre. Whether it's an action, detective, or sci-fi movie, he takes the best of the traditional elements and adds something fresh and non-trivial. That's the approach that really works.